Hi, Eduardo. Welcome to Funnel Vision Podcast. Excited to have you on today to share your sales expertise.
Well, thank you very much, and good morning to you, Alana. It's a pleasure to be here and of being of service to others.
Yeah, so jumping in with the first question, what is one game-changing tactic or your go-to for creating strong long-term client relationships?
Well, okay, this has been an evolution, obviously, over my career, but I would say that the biggest game-changing tactic in developing the relationships is stop and listen. Listen and enter into discussion without having an expectation of immediate gratification or immediate return. Before can offer anything, you've got to find out what the problem your potential client has, what his journey has been, and then develop some rapport around that. So shifting from transactional to relational for me has been the biggest game-changing tactic during my career.
Yeah, I think it's so important and it makes so much sense. Like, really, you're developing that relationship, and it's not just about selling. The first time that you get on the phone or meet someone, it's not about, selling. It's about meeting them, learning about them and their challenges, and then only then could you identify the problem and then, see if you're the solution.
You're spot on, especially nowadays. I mean, there's so much information out there. Customers are being overwhelmed on a daily basis with offers of this and offers of that. But few are the people that actually just sit down, have a coffee, and say, "Hey, what's your problem? What's going on?" And trying to go deeper into that analysis than just instead of just pitching a solution when the solution most probably won't be effective, and then you'll end up with a client who's spent his money needlessly and will never call you again.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. What's one piece of sales advice that you've received like throughout your career that has been, really kind of changed your approach?
So it's funny you mentioned that. As I said, this has been an evolution in my career. Obviously, we all go through a different journey, etc. But in my earlier days, I was much more open after or to a need excuse me, to an immediate gratification type mode of thinking. And I would receive emails and I would blurt out the first thing on my mind. So, and my email communications were terrible. In other words, very transactional, very point driven, and nobody, fortunately, ever complained. But at some point, my manager, sometimes he'd be on in CC, took me aside and said, "Eddie, you got to calm down. You don't need to respond immediately to every email that comes in. Short sentences sometimes work, but oftentimes what the client is looking for is a lot more depth. So calm down, think about what you're going to write, then think about it again, and then put it down in an email." And for the most part, I have followed that advice and it served me very well. I still fall into bad patterns. We all do. We're all human. But I do recognize that that is probably one of the best pieces of advice from a sales perspective if I've ever received from one of my leaders.
It really is like take a step back, right? Think of what you want to say, craft it, make it make sense, instead of like responding like immediately, or same thing, like responding sometimes emotionally instead of like looking at, like, especially if you get like a disappointing email or something, like don't respond like immediately. Think about it, kind of, figure it out, and then take that point. Like, don't emotionally respond, especially to an email.
And I like you said, emotionally, yes, and especially nowadays because social media now. Back in when I was starting out, email was a big thing. Before in my days, it was faxes, and before that, it was actually telex. So when email came around, it really opened up the world, made it easier to communicate. But we all are human. We all go into certain patterns, and that desire to immediately respond was just overwhelming, especially when you're young and full of piss and vinegar and want to get things done. And nowadays, where you have platforms like LinkedIn, which is for business, and Facebook, TikTok, and all these, which is more social, but they all kind of blend together, at least in your mind, especially the younger generation of salespeople, and they're on their phone and they're cranking it out, etc. So I think it's that advice is even more impactful, more meaningful nowadays for the younger generation of sales professionals. And certainly, like I said, I definitely listened, and it served me well.
Yeah. And I absolutely agree. It is so important, and everything you said just totally makes sense. And it's funny that you mentioned, like faxing and everything else. When I started out as well, we were faxing. We had just, some of our clients didn't even have email yet, kind of when I was started. And it was a very different world. But that kind of brings me to my next question is about AI too. And like, moving from emails, or faxes to emails and then, cell phones now, and everybody has a cell phone. Like, how do you think AI is going to change the sales world in the future?
I believe firmly AI has a place, and it's a great tool, and I do use it. Uh, but I think the hype is there right now because it's so novel. And I equate it to when CRMs first came out. So when the first CRMs came out, there was a concern if you were in sales management that this software was going to replace you, that the knowledge wasn't going to be required anymore, that, why did I go to get that extra degree or MBA if the CRM is can manage it all? And well, guess what? CRM is a great tool and it really helps, but you still need a certain level of management expertise to not only utilize it, but to analyze it and take that data and implement that data proactively and positively within your organization to help it to grow profitably. So AI is going to be the same way. Right now, there's so much noise around AI. It really is overwhelming. I mean, everything on LinkedIn is now an AI post. We're constantly saturated by training in AI. I see AI companies come and go, or they're all looking to hire people. It's great. At some point, it will consolidate. AI is definitely a great tool at this point in time for the daily grind around sales. The basics, Grammarly, for example, to make sure that your email is grammatically correct. The error people make is allowing AI to replace the intent of your message. So that's what you have to take care of. Once again, it's a tool. It's a highly effective tool. You've got to know how to utilize it, how to prompt it. Otherwise, there is no originality in AI. It may be a thinking machine in some contexts, but there's nothing original around the thought it has because it's taking all the available information on the internet and everything people feed into it. That's what it's doing. It's just basically analyzing that and giving you an answer based on all that input. But there's no original thought, at least not now, not at this point.
Yeah, and I totally agree. Then that's the same thing. Like for at Talent Harbor here, like we're using AI for, kind of those, recording video calls, right? And understanding like, getting those notes from calls. Like for us, we're recording interviews and kind of analyzing the interviews, but it- using it for, other things. You're exactly right. Like there's that you have to be original. You have to be able to use it, but then understand like relationship, sales, recruiting, all of these things are still relationship driven, and that's not going to happen through AI.
No, absolutely not. There's structural items that are common across industries. For example, if you want to create a compensation plan, you can structure it, you can ask AI to come out with an appropriate compensation plan for X industry at X revenue, X amount of salespeople, et cetera, et cetera. But that's only the structure, the framework. You still need a human being, a sales professional, to be able to take that structure, modify it according to your customer journey profile, your own team and their capabilities, and overall your internal culture. So AI is not going to help you modify that compensation package to your organizational culture. It may give you a structure, but you still need to be able to understand and how to use that tool effectively. And I think that's the point that a lot of people are missing out. And those that are afraid that AI is going to replace us all, especially in sales, are wrong. It's going to enhance sales, I think. It's going to make it a lot easier for a lot of the fundamentals, but you still need a seasoned professional to be able to utilize that output.
Absolutely agree. What do you think is something that a salesperson should stop doing if they want to become more successful?
Well, this is a difficult one because obviously we all have our styles and profiles, but anyone, my first reaction is always stop pitching. And it goes back to what I said before. Stop pitching a solution if you don't even know what the problem is. You learn how to diagnose the issues that your clients are facing. You know, but just coming up and immediately pitching a solution just shows that there's a level of ignorance there. And clients are smart. They're going to know that you're just trying to close that deal. They don't want to hear that. They want to hear value. What's your value proposition? Yes, pitch. Yes, we all want to close the deal, and we should all close the deal. But it's how you approach that process that really impacts not only the immediate sale, but your future potential.
Yeah, and I what I hear it's like saying is like again like it's got to be that relationship driven, really trying to solve their problem, and if you don't know their problem, you can't solve their problem, and you can't just pitch them a solution that's going to be, that doesn't really make sense for the problem that they have.
Yep, and you're absolutely right. And that's where AI kind of helps because it provides enough data that you could potentially understand the problem where it's coming from if you utilize it correctly. But this one-on-one, it's still going to happen. Even in the larger deals, it's still going to happen. Even stockbrokers end up having relationships with their biggest clients. It's a very transactional approach to selling stocks, etc., very time driven, etc., but they still need to develop those relationships.
Yeah, absolutely. Pivoting a little bit to like recruiting and finding sales talent, finding top tier sales talent and like true hunters and closers is very difficult. Do you have any strategies or tips for, identifying these people?
Yes, outsource.
I
I
agree with you.
listen. I am not. I'm a good judge of character in general. I understand what it takes to be a successful salesperson, but dependent upon the position I am at or in the organization, you have to, managers especially, have to ask themselves, is your time better served scouring through CVs, resumes, whatever you want to call it, and introduction letters, or doing what needs the business needs to stay productive, to stay profitable, and to grow. So that's why we have, specialists in the fields. And yes, prices vary. Some are on a retainer, some are commission based, etc. But any given organization and any good sales leader will always want to have in his pocket a dedicated outsourced talent recruiter, I guess is the easiest way to say it, in order to make sure that his team maintains that level of capability and the quality. Ultimately, you always get what you pay for. If you're just going to go through LinkedIn, excuse me, Indeed, and download several resumes, and you have no background, and you just think that hey, salespeople, so you'll find the right candidate, you'll get something. You may discover gold. Who knows? But is that the kind of risk you want on your team for your organization? No. So I say outsource. That's the best way. Once now the trick is obviously once the outsourced service brings you a viable pool of candidates, that's when your experience, your background, your one-on-one relationship approach really comes into play. But you don't have to spend needless amount of hours going through 100 different resumes. That's insane.
Yeah, I could not agree with you more. Especially that's what we do at Talent Harbor here, but
Yeah,
absolutely. And it's
exactly. Well,
also
this is where this relationship started because immediately recognized the value of your team and what it brings to my current clients and potential future clients. And to me
yeah.
personally, it makes my job easier. And it's I'm setting up all the right factors, all the right fundamental aspects for future success.
Yeah, and obviously I love that. And for sales, it is very important also to like for companies to work with, if you are going to work with a recruiter and outsource, to find a recruiter that specializes in sales roles because recruiting for sales is very different than recruiting for, other types of roles where it's you really got to dig in. Salespeople generally interview well. They generally have, a nice personality. You'll get off the call with them and say like, "Oh, I really like this person." That's great. That's great. But what have they done? And does that match what you're looking for? And have they used the same tools and things like that? So it is important to find an expert in that.
No, you're absolutely right. And on top of that, your level of expertise, for example, will gauge whether the past experience this person has is applicable to the position. Not everybody, yeah, and it's funny. I always see these job positions, so history of success in achieving quota and all these other aspects. Well, guess what? Not everybody hits quota. And that's not necessarily indicative of a bad salesperson, which is the argument I made to some of my sales leaders in the past and my leadership in the past. Because sometimes it's market, sometimes you don't have the right product for the client that you're trying to chase. There's a lot behind that. If all you're going to do is look for the people who are president club level, which is great. I mean, yeah, you want that kind of people, but that's a small talent pool. That's very small. So, do you want somebody who's already at that level, or in my case, I prefer to have people who are a little bit lower that I can continue to help mold, mentor towards a bigger and better. So, it's a matter of perspective as well.
Yeah, exactly. And sometimes when people are hitting quota, they're not really selling. Hitting quota doesn't mean that they're
Yes.
necessarily selling. Like a person can have, they can come from a company like, that has a very well-known name. They have a product that's selling itself. And so they're hitting quota because they're really more of an order taker sometimes, right? People are calling in. They don't really have to sell. People know what you do. So selling at like a huge company that has a name recognition is very different than selling for a smaller company when you truly have to prove that value.
And you're absolutely right. And let me give you a quick example here from my corporate days. I had one of my quotas for a fiscal year was $1.4 billion. That was the highest quota I've ever had in my life. But that 1.4, 1.2 of it was a single contract, which was more of a renewal than so. Yet there was still risk. I'm not minimizing the labor, the work that my team did, nor I did on the pursuit of that. There was still a lot of hustle, a lot of engagement, a lot of relationships. You still had to win it, but the risk factor was different than somebody who maybe has a 1 million quota and has needs to greenfield everything, and everything is calling, calling, calling. So these are factors that you got to understand in hiring your sales professionals. What's the background to your point? Sometimes the bigger brand, the bigger companies, the sales quotas are easier to achieve and are bigger, and it's just false information. You've got to understand the culture behind the organization, the culture of the salesperson himself. So there's a lot of factors, and once again, I go back to that's why you outsource that, because there are people who have that talent who know to ask these things. Listen. I love walking into a room and say, when they ask me, "What was your biggest deal?" I was, "Oh, it's 1.2 billion," and it was like, "Whoa, whoa!" But you start going into details, and I fought for deals that are like $25,000 a lot harder than I did for that deal because it's different realities, different contexts, different customer profiles, etc.
Yeah, absolutely. Makes total sense and agree with you fully. So yeah, so tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, what you do and where can people find you?
Oh my God, I should have a beer instead of coffee for that one. But so it's funny if you look at my background. How does a a guy who graduated UT Austin with a history degree end up in sales, of all things? And I think it points back to my inclination of always to be of service. I was a Boy Scout, Weeblo. I've always liked helping people, trying to figure out problem solver from an early youth. And as with most people around the age of 20, I decided to do crazy things. So I joined the military. I was in law enforcement as well. And, especially the law enforcement part, people go, how do you go from law enforcement to being sales guy? And so one thing at a time, the military aspect gave me background in being able to sell homeland security technology solutions. So, and the law enforcement, I mean, if we look at the average uh, police officers talk to people. They try to
That's
resolve
right.
problems. No matter what you see in the media, blah blah blah. There's good, just like there's good and bad salespeople. There's good and bad police officers. But the fundamental aspect of policing is conflict resolution, trying to find a problem and doing it hopefully verbally rather than use of force. So, fortunately, that's a lesson I learned during my law enforcement days. Along with my military, I springboarded from there to into technology sales for security applications and slowly built up my career over 30 years, jumping to many of the main government suppliers of government homeland security requirements. But, I've been up and down. I've been a director, VP, as well as a regional sales guy. I thrive on meeting customers as well as managing teams. So that's why when I'm approached now, and I left corporate last year, started my own outsourced VP of sales company supported by SX. So it's a great organization. Uh, when people ask me what I do, I'm an application specialist in the sales function of your organization. You don't hire me because I have a Rolodex of names in the food services industry or in the food and the garment industry. You hire me because after 30 years, I've been there and done that at all levels, and I'm here to help you solve your fundamental sales problems. Get your team organized, get them into a cadence that marches towards profitable growth, not growth, not revenue, profitable growth or profitable revenue, because there's differences. I can take any team and double the revenue, but then you'll end up losing all your money, and that's not a good thing. So that's where I focus on being of service to the small and medium-sized companies in the greater San Diego area and helping them with the fundamentals of their sales organization. And I'm sorry, to answer your question, you can obviously find me on LinkedIn. I'm there. And you can go to www.metisadvancedsolutions.org, which is my website. We're now a team, so we recently expanded. So it's not just me by myself. There's other people you can pick if you don't like me personally for some reason. I don't know. But and we even have a business coach on the team helping out. So it's been a great experience, and I'm glad to see that after 30 years, my knowledge base, my skill sets still apply, and I'm still helping people.
That's wonderful. I love that. And yeah, I look forward to continuing our conversation soon. Thank you.
Likewise, thank you for this opportunity. Really great.